In our last screencast, we spent a little time introducing you to graphing with Forena. If you recall, in that screencast, we created a simple orders graph that was a three-dimensional pie chart. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at how you can customize further the look and feel of this particular graph by editing the FRX file directly. So let's take a look at that. If you'll recall, our reports are stored in our site's default files reports folder of our Drupal site. That's where we configured them to be. And there's one thing that I want to kind of warn you about is that when you are switching back and forth between creating reports within the templating system that's provided with Forena and then editing the FRX files directly, sometimes permissions can be a little bit of an issue. So if we look at the listing of all our permissions, you'll see in some case when I create a new sample report like this sample report 3, it's owned by the www user, but it is not given write permissions by anybody but the www user. So in these cases, for my orders graph, I had to actually change the permissions so that I could actually work on that on the file systems. Otherwise, you're going to get errors when trying to save your orders graph file. So just be aware of that as you're switching back and forth between those. So the next thing that we want to do is take a look at that graph. So once again, we're going to look at our site's default files reports folder, which is where these get stored, and we're going to take a look at this orders graph, which is the one that we saved earlier. You'll see down in the bottom of the report there's the table, which is not kind of what we're interested. That's the table that's below the graph. The actual graph itself is generated by this single line of XHTML, which is an SVG that has a custom renderer of FRX SVG graph. It kind of illustrates that with Forena we can actually build custom renderers to do different things, and that's how we're generating graphs. You'll notice the type here is a 3D pie graph. That type is actually directly from the SVG PHP SVG graph graph types. You'll also notice that there's some fields like the label and series 1 being orders. Remember, we specified those when we were creating the graph to begin with. And this then we can actually leverage by looking at the graphing documentation. We can use any of the options that are provided on the PHP SVG graph site for doing this. So if I'm working on a pie chart, I can just go and whoops, excuse me, I can go down and find my pie graph documentation for SVG. It shows you the overall thing, and you'll notice it gives you a code example. We won't need to worry about that. But then it also goes down in the settings and talks about settings that are common to all graph types, and then another list of settings that are relevant to the pie graph types. So we can actually use any of these as custom FRX tags in our SVG graph. So for example, if I wanted to change the background color of my graph, we could or maybe change the rounding of the background edge. We could try that. So let's go ahead and try that. So go back into our thing that says back_round. So I'm just going to add an attribute of FRX:back_round equal, and then using good XHTML syntax, I'll say equal 5. And if we go back here, we should hit refresh, and you'll notice, oh, a very ever so slight rounding of that. Maybe we'll make that 15 to make that a little bit larger so that we can see it a little bit better. So that changed the back rounding of the SVG graph option. So there's lots of options. We can do things like, add titles, frx : title equal, and in this case we'll say my graph, right? And all of these options are run through the token replacement engine. So if I wanted to specify an option from my SQL data, I could certainly do that just by referencing the particular, putting the curly braces around it to do the graph type. So let's go ahead and finish doing this. So great. So oops, title actually is an invisible title. I keep making that mistake while I'm doing the demos. We want graph title. There we go. And if we set graph title equal my graph, then it's going to go ahead and display that. So there's a host of SVG entries that you can use that are documented on the SVG website, PHP SVG graph website, that are really, any of these you can set. One thing I do need to point out is that sometimes we need to specify arrays of data that need to be passed to the SVG graphing library. There's a couple of cases where this comes up. One, if you're passing links, then you might need to reference links, and the other is colors. The most common one is colors. So let me illustrate changing colors really quickly. In this case, what we'll do is we'll set colors syntax of, but notice I'm putting _1 on there. So if I say color 1 equals blue and frx : colors 2 equals red, then what that will do is correspondingly change the colors to alternating blue and red. There's other cases where you're specifying gradients and things like that in the SVG graph. So if we look down at some of the graph-specific options, there's a section down here at the bottom where we do depth shade gradient, and they want an array of values in that case. So again, we do depth shade gradient _1 equals black 0.9 and depth shade gradient _2 equals black 0.9. Also notice that at the top here there are areas where we want to specify so colors. In this example, you'll notice these are set via other methods, the graph links, the graph values, and stuff like that. So links and colors are treated specially by SVG graphs. So you'll use this colors syntax here for the colors, and then for the links, if you want to do that, here you can, it was where the token replacement stuff really begins to shine. So you can say frx length equal, and in this case you'll specify a token replaced relative link. So you could do a link to another graph where we might do customers. If you had a graph called maybe reports / customers .data, and you wanted to specify an option here, you could say customer equal customer ID, and that would build a link that was token replaced, so that when you clicked on the graph, it could be done and drill down. So these are how the example reports that are delivered with Forena. You'll notice that the one graph that is included is a drill down from that perspective. So that's a really useful trick. So links are a bit different. Colors are a bit different because they're set programmatically, so they're handled a bit differently. And also remember the array syntax for doing your settings. Well, that should be enough to get you started with graphing. One thing that I will point out is that any of those graph specific options that you could imagine trying to get the look and feel the same across 5 or 10 graphs in your sets of reports might be a difficult proposition. But here's where you definitely want to look at the Forena skins concept. The Forena skins can be used to set these initial graphing options for any and all of your graphs, or specifically by graph type. More on that on another screencast about using skins.